and most welcome to 1103, and we will continue on the advice of Kalle Lundahl, with Heraclitus. He is the most enticing person, and it is also interesting that he has his revival now, I've seen on the internet already. And this is caused by Ian McGilchrist's two books, The Master and His Emissary, and his more recent enormous book, The Matter with Things. It seems there is a renaissance going on for Heraclitus, which makes me, of course, very happy. We are now at page 275, and I will repeat a little bit because the last one was 122 from the fragments. Our interpretation, to read directly from Kahn, our interpretation of 122 is confirmed by a passage already referred to in Plato's Heraclitus, where he is expounding the doctrine of flux and offers two connected etymologies for Zeus and just, H Kahn. Plato here mentions the view that there is something which pervades or passes through all things and is cause of everything that comes about. This universal causal factor is the swiftest and finest of all things, and because it administers epitropeo, all things by moving through, dia, ion, it was rightly called by this name, dikaion, just. And someone said it was right to call it Zeus in the accusative dia as the cause, for the cause is that because dia of which things happens. End of quote from Heraclitus. Socrates claims he has been able to learn these doctrines only with great difficulty as secret lore, and he found that his informants could not agree on any further answers to his persistent question, what is just? Quote, one of them says it's the sun that is just, dikaion, for it alone by moving through, dia, ion, and burning, kaon, administers all beings. But when I tell this to someone else, he laughs at me and asks if I think there is nothing just once the sun has set. When I persist in asking what it takes justice to be, he says it's fire. But this is not easy to understand. Another says it's not fire itself, but the very heat which is present in fire. Another one claims to laugh at all these views and says the just is what Anaxagoras meant. Intelligence, nous, for this is the supreme power, and being mixed with nothing else, it sets all things in order by moving through them all. End of quote. How far this account is based upon Plato's own reading of Heraclitus, how far it reflects the exegesis of earlier Heracliteans, we can only guess. The connections between the sun, elemental fire, supreme intelligence, and the cosmic causal factor are all to be found in the fragments. What Plato adds is that the fiery wisdom of the universe sets things in order by moving through them, and perhaps this is a natural interpretation of 121. Fire coming on, Epelthon, will catch up with all things. This view of fire as literally penetrating everything in the world would fully agree with other pre-Platonic attempts to conceive the causal action of the supreme principle in terms of physical presence and penetration. Heraclitus must also have thought of this, his divine principle, as in some sense all-pervasive, immanent in the natural order, and in all of its constituents, as the pantheistic tendency of 123 will make clear. The Greeks before Plato and Aristotle seem able to conceive of spiritual or intelligent ordering of the world only in terms of rarefied, all-pervading physical presence, like the ether of pre-Einsteinian physics. Even in the 4th century AD, Augustine was able to free himself from his corporal view of God only by the study of Neoplatonic metaphysics. The Stoic speaks of the supreme deity in pre-Socratic fashion as breath, pneuma, or rational fire, pir noeron, a power which orders all things by passing through them all. I have left for the end the phrase need. Chresmosyne and satiety, choros, whose authenticity is guaranteed by independent citations in Philo and Plutarch. All three authors reflect a Stoic interpretation which identify the two terms with successive stages in the cosmic cycle. Quote, need is the construction of the world order, dia kosmesis. Satiety is the universal conflagration, ekpyrosis. I see no way of deciding whether or not this interpretation is based upon something in the lost context of 120. The Stoics may simply have taken their clue from Theophrastus, who construed the related pairs war, peace, strife, agreement as a reference to these cosmic periods. Of the opposites, the one that leads to generation and coming to be is called war and strife. The one leading to the conflagration is called agreement and peace. In the exegesis of 120, need takes the place of strife. Satiety replaces peace and agreement. The substitution was an easy one, given the parallel pairs of 123. Perhaps the only safe conclusion from such reports is that Heraclitus presented need and satiety in some close connection with fire. Compare hunger and satiety in 123. The actual phenomenon of fire may be characterized intuitively in terms of need or hunger for fuel and repletion and satiety when it burns itself out. In Greek, choros, satiety, suggests hybris and carries connotations of disaster. Hence the Stoic interpretation of Koros as the destruction of world order. We recall the analogy between hybris and destructive fire in 104. If the kindling and extinction of fire is taken as a figure for the cosmic order, this pattern may be redescribed as need and satiety. For similar pairing of hunger, limus, and satiety, see 517. Now we go to a new quote here, 123. The God, day and night, winter and summer, war and peace, satiety and hunger, it alters as when mingled with perfumes, it gets named accordingly to the pleasure, hedone, of each one. (123) consists of two distinct sentences connected by the particle de. The first of these announces as its topic the God, or theos, and offers as a comment 4 pairs of antithetical nouns. The second sentence begins with the verb it alters, or it becomes different, alo eutai, without any subject express, and continues with a complex comparative clause containing a subordinate clause of time. Just as when it is mingled with perfumes, it is named according to the pleasure of each one. Again, no subject noun is provided for either clause, unless we add one, as many editors have done. There is thus a sharp formal contrast between the two sentences. The first consists of 9 nouns in the nominative with no syntax, simply a list of names. The second sentence is all syntax, with 3 finite verb clauses, but no subject noun. In the first, the God is described by a formal pattern of antithesis, or theo. In the second, by a verb of process, explicated in turn by analogy to another process. This elaborate formal asymmetry gives us a strong prima facie reason for resisting the editorial temptation to introduce a subject noun into the second sentence. I consider the two sentences in turn. 1. This is the only definition of deity in the fragments. Other texts dealing with the many gods may be divided into 4 groups. Group 1 develops the traditional contrast between divine insight and human ignorance, but tells us nothing further about the divine. Group 2 posits a mysterious equivalence between gods and humans. Let's continue. Sorry for the mishap there. I would say that was a sign of God, God's hand interacting I'm not far from a very holy place where people pilgrimage, the well of Paul the Apostle, and I think we were blessed right now. And I would say Heraclitus in itself is a blessing. I think this could be the holy key that was mentioned in the old annals. Well, we continue here. We continue here. This is the only definition of deity in the fragments. Other texts dealing with the gods may be divided into 4 groups. Group 1 develops the traditional contrast between divine insight and human ignorance, but tells us nothing further about the divine. Group 2 posits a mysterious equivalence between gods and humans, immortals and mortals, suggesting some deeper unity which these opposites are reconciled. Group 3 speaks in mythical terms of specific gods, Dionysus and Hades, Dike and her servants the Furies, Apollo whose oracle is in Delphi. The reference to justice point to a 4th group in which 123 will be included. These are the texts that invoke a supreme principle of cosmic unity, which lies beyond the traditional Greek conception of the divine. In 2 cases, the principle described in terms appropriate to deity is explicitly contrasted with gods, theoi, as normally understood, war which has made some gods and others men, and the cosmic fire which no one either of gods or of man has made. War and fire thus appear as designations of the new Super Zeus, a principle of universal order and justice that must coincide with the wise one alone, of 127. It is this principle that we have just seen described as thunderbolt. Fire or sun which never sets, it must be the same supreme principle that nourishes all human laws as the Divine One in 30. It prevail as it will and suffices for all and is more than enough. We thus find 2 quite distinct conceptions of deity in Heraclitus. The gods in general as opposed to men, including the individual powers designated by traditional names other than Zeus and Dike, are conceived as one member of the polar opposition, immortals, mortals, Hades, Dionysus. And hence, as partial constituents, which, if isolated, cannot be identified with the world order as a whole. On the other hand, there is the Divine One, the Wise One, the principle of unity represented by war and fire, and identified with the cosmos that is common to all. Now the antithesis will follow, make clear that the God of 123 must also represent this universal principle of cosmic unity. But it is striking that the definitions given in our sentence make no use of the network of terms by which this concept is articulated in other fragments. Cosmic fire, unique wisdom, universal steering, the logos according to which all things come to pass. Instead, 123 displays the divine plan in typical instances of its constituent structure. 4 pairs of opposites divide into 2 groups. Day and night, winter and summer, define the cosmic order of change and regularity, within which human life is carried on. The last two pairs, war and peace, satiety and famine, represent extreme human experiences of disruption and restoration, but all four pairs are characterized by a common pattern: the alternation and interdependence of positive and negative term. Thus, war and famine represent things dangerous and destructive, while peace and satiety represent what is positive and desirable. A similar positive-negative contrast underlies the antithesis of the first group. Summer is the good season, kalo kairi, fair weather in modern Greek, and the ancient name theros suggests crops, whereas winter is named from storm, shemon. Daylight stands for life, but night is the fearful power of darkness. Hence her euphemistic name, Ephrone, the kindly one, used throughout the fragments. Now the regularity of seasons and the changing ratio of day and night was recognized as the very pattern of cosmic plan, the work of an ordering intellect. The formal symmetry of our sentence seemed to make a similar point about the negative and positive extremes of human experience. By the measures of cosmic order, peace and war, satiety and hunger are necessarily joined together within a total unity that is the God. But whereas other fragments assert the unity of a specific pair of opposites, what our sentence adds is the thesis of unity for all the pairs. Except for the war and peace, the antithesis of 123, all reappear in other fragments. The pairing of war and peace is unique, since elsewhere war stands alone for the cosmic order. We thus recognize a duality in the rule of war, which figures here as one constituent of a particular antithesis, and there as the principle of antithesis as such, just as we have distinguished a partial and total conception of deity and a particular elemental and universal cosmic rule for fire. There is no one term that can designate the principle of total order without ambiguity. And I would say that also goes for what Gödel showed with his incompleteness theorem. It would be pointless to debate whether these four pairs of opposites are to be attributed to the God as predicates or strictly identified with him as alternative descriptions. The logical dichotomy between the is of predication and the is of identity is a conceptual anachronism, which does do violence to the simple directness of Heraclitus's language. God is in some sense defined by or identified with the opposites here, though of course he or it cannot be identified with any one or with any pair taken alone. Nor can the list be regarded as an exhaustive account of deity. The God will be strictly identical only with the total pattern of opposition, of which these four pairs are paradigmatic specimens. This pattern is the order of the universe, its unifying structure as balancing of opposites over time. The God identified in 123 is neither a physical substance nor an underlying element, nor any concrete body like elemental fire. This is obvious from the first sentence, but often forgotten in the exegesis of what follows. 2. It alters as when mingled with perfumes. It gets named according to pleasure of each. What is that alters or becomes other in kind? Aloios. The God surely, but not the God as some underlying subject or substrate that could manifest itself in the opposites taken one at a time, being actually and in itself an entity distinct from the null. This substratum interpretation of 123, which is encouraged by a superficial reading of the simile of incense as well as by the Aristotelian view of Heraclitan fire as material cause, is clearly ruled out by the preceding sentence. For there is no one subject which might become first day, then night, then winter or summer, war or peace. Days and nights are themselves part of and modified by summer and winter, just as they are qualified in turn by war and peace. The four pairs of opposites are in no sense alternatives to one another, as potential attributes of some underlying subject, in the way that different fragrances may characterize a single fire. It is only between the two terms of any given pair that a change of this kind can be understood. So the verb it alters must refer to a change from any one term to its opposites, or more generally, to every change between opposites. This is the divine structure of cosmic process according to Heraclitus. It is a misreading of the simile to suppose that there is some process by which cosmic fire might change from day to winter, from peace to famine, or from one pair of opposites to another, and it's the same misreading that leads so many editors to insert fire or some other known as subject of the clause when it's mingled with perfume. This is incredibly important, and I think we all do that mistake these days. We try to think that something can just evolve like life out of nothing. It cannot, and by thinking so we lose it. Sorry, I think I end there. I would continue with the B.